This is going to be one controversial video. Hey, what's going on everyone? Vasco here and welcome back to the channel. And today let's talk about one of the topics that's been making the rounds during the summer break in Formula 1, which is crash damage. So by this point in the season, and especially after the Hungarian Grand Prix, most teams have had at least one major crash with their cars. And these crashes cost a lot of money. Maybe a little bit less than teams state because they are probably inflating the costs in order to make their point even stronger, but even still, we are talking about millions of dollars of crash damage by this point of the season, in a season where there is a budget cap. And crashes like what happened to Max Verstappen, Sergio Perez or Charles Leclerc can damage or destroy a power unit, and those power units cost more than $1 million on their own. So what's the problem this year? This used to happen every single year, so every single year teams would crash and teams would have damage. What's different this year? Well, with the budget cap, what teams like Ferrari and Red Bull are trying to make is that teams who are responsible for each other's damage having to pay the crash, in order for the team that suffered the crash not having to sacrifice development resources under the budget cap in order to fix their cars. And the way that teams like Ferrari and Red Bull want this done is they want the stewards to apply blame. So imagine the Silverstone or the Hungarian scenario. In both situations, Mercedes was found predominantly or wholly to blame in the case of Hungary, but in the case of Silverstone, Mercedes was found to be predominantly to blame in that scenario. And what would happen is that Mercedes would have to pay at least a little bit of the repair bill of Red Bull. Now, this is something that the cost cap doesn't take into account, and it's not written in the rules, so I don't think it will happen during this season, but it's something that teams never had to worry about in the pre-budget cap era, because especially these big teams like Red Bull and Ferrari, they have the money to make up for these crashes, so they don't need to bother. Where they are being bothered is when they have a finite amount of money, and crucially the same amount of money as other teams, and some of that money is being taken away from crashes which weren't their fault. So now let me give you my opinion. Under the budget cap regulations, it's really bad for a team to suffer a lot of crashes, and especially when those crashes aren't their fault, so it isn't one of their drivers to be the one to blame, or a technical fault caused by the team. It's really bad to having to sacrifice your development resources in order to fix a car. Instead of developing this year or next year's car, you have to stop those development parts and potentially build less parts for this or next year's car in order to fix the damage to a pre-existing car where you won't have any performance to justify the money that you spent fixing the car. And I think that this can really put Red Bull's championship hopes under threat, because if you think about it, Mercedes have suffered less crashes than Red Bull, which means that they are going to have more money to invest in this year's and next year's car, which is potentially going to give them a big advantage over Red Bull. And in most cases when it comes to Red Bull's accidents, so think Hungary, Silverstone and Baku, Red Bull could have done nothing different. So in Silverstone they could have done something different, but in Hungary and Baku, where Max's tire just blew up, they couldn't have done a lot different. They were just in the wrong place at the wrong time, and now they are going to have to pay for those damages. But on the other side of the coin, you have the fact that this would put a lot of pressure on the stewards. So you see that the stewards are already very much criticized for every single decision. So you can just check the comment section in my Hamilton versus Verstappen video from Silverstone to check out how controversial the steward decision was. Max fans wanted Hamilton to be disqualified, whilst Lewis fans think that the penalty was really unfair and it was just a racing incident. And you can see that how polarizing those opinions are. On the case of Hungary, fortunately, it's really easy to assign the blame to Valtteri Bottas, which was on the wrong place at the wrong time. But then again, it was a rainy situation, he lost a lot of downforce being behind Lando Norris, and he probably couldn't see anything with the spray. So even in this not controversial situation, the penalty that was given to Bottas was controversial. Red Bull wanted more, Mercedes wanted less. So it's already a controversial situation when the stewards have only the pressure to say you were at fault. You get a 5-second, 10-second or a 5-place grid penalty, and the stewards are already very criticized. There is already a lot of discussion surrounding the topics, and sometimes, and we see this happening often, there's never an agreement being reached, or the stewards are objectively wrong. So just think about back to Austria, where there were 5-second penalties being handed out almost every lap, telling you that the driver was at fault for that incident. And now put yourself in the place of the steward. now your decision not only affects the sporting side, so with your decision you are not only saying I'm going to give you a 15-second penalty, I'm going to ruin your race, you are potentially saying this driver is at fault, is going to get a penalty, and then I'm going to affect the budget of the team by making them pay for the damage that they've done. So all of a sudden the steward's decision is now much heavier because it not only affects a racing result, it affects the budget cap. And I think that this is a lot of pressure to put inside of the stewards, and I think that in controversial situations just like Silverstone, this will be a very heavy burden and will generate a lot of controversy. So in the case of Silverstone, where I think that both drivers could have done something to avoid the crash, Mercedes would now be forced to pay for Max's car damage, and I think that this won't be fair. And even in the case of Aston Martin and Ferrari, where you saw that Stroll just piled into Leclerc, it was a really tricky racing situation with a big crash, with rain on the track, and Stroll just missed his braking. Now, I agree completely with you that the fault is 100% at Stroll and that Leclerc did nothing wrong. But the stewards applied no penalty in that situation, so now Bottas has a 5-second penalty, so Mercedes has to pay everyone's crash damage, but Lance Stroll doesn't. This doesn't really make any sense, and when it comes to a penalty, you can see that the Stroll situation and the Bottas situation were really different, and you can kind of justify why one got a penalty and the other didn't, but you can't justify in the same way why one has to pay and the other doesn't. So you can see my point where this would get really tricky and where decisions would be very controversial and would really impact a team beyond that race. They would impact the team for this season and potentially next season, and sometimes if the decision wasn't clear cut, just like the Bottas crash in Hungary, it would generate a lot of controversy and you would see appeals left, right and center. So we now already see appeals with penalties, but imagine what would happen if money was on the way. So you can see my point, but I'm also going to offer a solution. So teams like Ferrari and Red Bull, which are the ones that are going to complain the most in the season because they are the teams that have the most to lose, they have a lot of cash in the bank, and by this point most teams except for Haas can meet or exceed the budget cap. So they have the money in the bank for allocated to each season to exceed the budget cap. So what I would suggest is that if a driver is found to be not at fault for a crash, so if in the case of Stroll versus Leclerc, there was no penalty but the fault was completely on Stroll, what I think would happen is that Ferrari could tell the stewards, okay, Lance destroyed our car. It's going to cost us a new power unit, which is already going to give us a grid penalty for the race where we have to replace it. And this was not on us. So what we want is an exemption to fix the car without counting towards the budget cap. And I think that this would be the perfect solution because we are avoiding the controversy, because no one would get really upset about Ferrari spending Ferrari's money to fix Ferrari's car. That was what happened every single season up to now. And I think that in situations where it's really clear cut who was at fault, this would be no problem. And for situations where the fault would not be so clear, just like the Silverstone situation, then the stewards would have to step in, but they wouldn't be taking money from one team to giving to another. They would just be saying, okay, Red Bull, we think that Lewis is at fault, so you get to fix the car without counting towards your budget cap. But with a crucial thing that you have to install the exact same parts. No aero upgrades, no engine upgrades, nothing. No suspension upgrades. The same exact car has to be built by the same specification, and it would have to be analyzed by the FIA. Whilst if it was inside the budget cap, you could put a new front wing, new engine, whatever you wanted, and there would be no problem. So this would be my suggestion. When you're not at fault, the stewards can decide that very easily. You get the budget back to pay for the repairs, but you have to use the same specification of component. Whilst if you are at fault, or if no clear fault is attributed, so 50-50, a racing incident, then you would have to pay for your own crash, but not your rivals, and you could install any part you want on the car. And honestly, I think that it was a big misstep from the FIA and Formula 1 not to adjust these kind of rules with the introduction of a budget cap, because you really need to adjust the financial rules in these kind of situations in order not to get all this controversy, and in order for teams to be able to race as hard as they want whilst staying in the budget cap and being able to develop a car for the new regulations, which I think is something that is being forgotten, is that each crash that happens this year, it's less money for next year's car, which is crucial for the team's next 5 years. So this is why teams are so worried. This is why you are hearing so much about money. And I think that Formula One missed the trick by not adapting the financial regulations to account for crashes, because in the beginning of the season, when you break 1 or 2 front wings, is really not a big problem. But once you start getting into destroyed power units, things get really tricky. So let me know what you think in the comments down below, and let me know if there is any better suggestion to solve this problem than the one that I gave in the end of this video. So this has been it for this video, and if you did enjoy, please don't forget to check my latest video on who I think that the best performing team in 2021 is, and spoiler alert, it's not Red Bull nor Mercedes. So I'm going to leave the video in the card right here, so please check it out if you enjoyed this one, and don't forget to like, comment and subscribe on this video if you enjoyed the content. So this has been it for this video, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye!